start our next venture, and it's, like I said, it's important to look at the manual. I have a washer. Now this is a replacement washer, because I think this case was missing it, but it's just a 16th inch washer, right? And the diameter you could get off of the mark that's on your case, which is what I did. I think it's obviously a metric shaft size, but I had a standard size washer, so I just filed out the center of the hole, cleaned it off, and called it good. Now you can see there's a washer here and a washer there. I'll get that closer so I can see it. Yeah, the 45 number is just the O-ring. We put that in another video. So 44 and 43 are the two little washers. So we got one washer here, one washer here. That's what I was saying. This washer will fall down inside the case when you're taking this apart. So if you're missing that washer, take a look inside the case and you shall probably find it. Obviously this little slider gear one is what engages. You can see obviously this pushes that away when, you know, it's all the way down, right? So it's pushing the gear away in the rested position when the spring's pushing it. Now when you kick it, oh, see, it pushes this gear. Anyway, if you're this far, you're gonna know anyway, so no. It pushes this gear out on the other gear and then it kicks over the engine, obviously, then disengages. So now we can put this gear in, since that's obviously the next step. Now, this is what I was saying maybe earlier in the video, but this shaft sometimes is stuck inside that case. When I took this case apart, the shaft actually came out from the case, as you see there, and I replaced that bearing, which was fun. What I did to replace that bearing was, let me find this other piece. I had it here a minute ago. Obviously there's a lot of stuff on this table, so it makes it easy to lose stuff. Here it is. So what I did is I had this shaft was ruined because the keyway was all messed up, right? It was all egged out from eating a stop plate. So I got a new shaft from eBay, or you could just file a bigger moon key, right? And how I could tell it was bad is when I rotated this gear, and I could hear it when running in the engine, you could hear a clunk clunk. This gear was loose on the shaft and it busted it all out. So I replaced the shaft, so I have this spare one, and what I did is I hammered it into that bearing, and this is the old bearing, right? Actually, bearing was fine anyway, I suppose, but I had a new one. And then I turned the case around this way and held it in my hand. I hit this side with a rubber hammer, because you don't want to damage the case. And then the inertia, right, made this bearing come out with the shaft. So that's how you get that out if you want to. Obviously, if your whole gear and everything was stuck in there and you wanted to get it out, you'd hold this above the grass or whatever and hit this side with just a rubber mallet, and that whole gear assembly will fall out. But make sure you're not above concrete or anything because you don't want to damage it. So the next step to get this in, and this is what I was mentioning earlier, is you have to be careful when you're hammering this in. You obviously want to use a rubber mallet or a lead hammer or something, because you know you don't want to mess up the surfaces. When you're tapping this in through the bearing, right, because that's the main drive sprocket, you want to watch this little gear and this little metal tab, because what'll happen is it'll catch up, and then it'll bend your tab, and then when you kick your Kickstarter, it'll be out of spec, and it won't even engage in the gear back here. Ask me how I know, because it happened to me. So when you're tapping with your rubber hammer, or whatever other soft metal hammer, could be a lead hammer, whatever, just watch it and make sure it's not binding up and bending the tab beyond its range, and then it's going to be messed up and you'll have to adjust it. Trust me, I've had to do it. So now we'll just tap this in and see how it goes. Okay, also while you're tapping lightly, you want to watch and make sure that, you know, these gears are lining up. This is why you have to put this little gear on first, because it can't fit past this bigger gear. So make sure these teeth are lining up as you're tapping gently with the mallet, and then make sure that this spring tab isn't getting bent, all while holding the Kickstarter shaft in and making sure your washer here doesn't fall off. Okay, at this point, I think we're done for this assembly of the case, and I can go ahead and put in, I obviously don't want to mess this up because then you're going to have to break that seal, but I think we're ready to double check the torques and everything, which I already did anyway, and then RTV that rubber gasket, or the paper gasket for that case, and then bolt that piece. And you could use the black RTVs. It doesn't have to be high temp, although you could probably burn your finger, maybe not, on the block, right? When it's super hot, probably not, only the head. But I just use the red stuff because that's what I got. Also, it helps hold it in place. You're going to notice here that obviously the gasket's slipping. So you're going to want to make sure you line that up as you're getting it close, right? And you'll put it through the hole. So keep an eye on that, right? She's trying to droop down. Sorry, I'm probably getting in the way. But, you know, you're just going to tap this on with a rubber hammer, most likely, when you get rubber mallet, when you get close. But make sure the holes obviously line up. And what I did to put that film of RTV on is I squirted out RTV on there, and I rubbed the gasket gently between my fingers to coat both sides thinly. Anyway, probably not needed because it had just had paper before, but that's what I do to make sure I don't get leaks. And I'll be doing that on the base of the head and base of the cylinder to make sure it doesn't leak. And also I'll be lapping that, so I'll show that too. So obviously I had to tap it on with the rubber mallet because it's tight, right? But I just kind of hit here and made sure it went on evenly. And then you're going to want to quickly wipe away all the excess RTV, that's for sure. You might want to use black RTV on these side cases and split case, but because you can see a little tiny red line, but I actually kind of like an orangey red anyway, but obviously it wouldn't have stuck out like dog's balls, basically. So learn from my mistakes. Use black low temp RTV, I think it is on this case and that case, or you don't have to. I've just used paper gaskets as well, but like I said, I'd just rather not have it leak and have to take it apart again. But it probably wouldn't leak anyway, so you probably don't need to RTV those. But definitely use red high temp RTV on this gasket, on this gasket. Actually, on this gasket, I'll probably use a copper compound one or high temp RTV. We'll see. I'll check how many degrees that's for. Obviously, I'll be doing that in another video, not this video, but that's where we're at. Obviously, I use stainless hardware here. What I did is I bought these. You can buy 2 different kits on eBay, and for your sake, it's going to be easier since you'll have this part number and barcode. I'm looking for the other box, so I apologize if I'm shaking the camera around. There's that part number on Amazon. And here's the other part number for the 2 different lengths, a lifetime supply. Probably not, actually. I've already used obviously a whole bunch. So that portion's done, and we'll move on to the next step by looking at our manual. And we can see there's some things that need to go in. This is all one assembly that you'll see. You'll see. Piece to go on is obviously this. It's shown as broken apart in an exploded view on the manual there, but clearly it's the next part to go on. And obviously we're just going to rotate it gently. And whoop. Okay, that sucker is on there. Then the next step, obviously looking at our manual here, is big clutch basket. Uh-oh, there's a little washer. Little washer. Big washer, actually. It's kind of annoying how this case has stuff sticking out the other side, but I can see which way that was, right? The wear marks. Aren't going to want to forget that. Now, I know there's a snap ring that's in this baggie. That snap ring goes on next. Hey, you don't even need the manual, just use me. Just kidding, you should check the manual, but you can see there's a lot of clutch material left on this centrifugal clutch. It's probably never going to wear out. It's a wet clutch. It's probably never going to wear out, and this buzzer was, I think, on its second piston size. Oh no, this buzzer was on its last piston size. So it went through 3 oversizes, and maybe they replaced the clutch along the way, but it still looks like brand new. I apologize, it's not focusing. I'm definitely going to wipe some of these parts off, and really I should rinse them off in gasoline first, but anyway, that's the gist of it. Next step is to get that snap ring on. And you can, get it on most of the way, or not all the way if you're not filming. Shove it. There we go. You probably heard that little snap. Now she's on there. Now for the next step, I could turn the engine over a little bit. There we go. Obviously there's a keyway in there. And for that, we got a key. And that's why I kept this stuff in separate bags. Because, it's going to make it easier. So, we'll get our little key. We don't even really show this, but of course it's going to drop. I'm using one hand. My little clutch basket was nasty in here, so I would definitely rinse that out with some gas, right? Or whatever. If you want to use something else. But gas is pretty safe because obviously it'll evaporate away and everything. And you're going to be covering it with oil soon anyway. But I'll get this key in. I'm going to pause it because obviously I can't do it with one hand. Even to get these keyways out, I'd use like an aluminum punch on the edge and just tap on the end of the keyway. This one's a metal punch, but you'd want to use an aluminum one. If you wanted to remove this keyway, then use an aluminum or brass punch. hit on the end, that way it won't deform the key. The metal one will, but I already put my brass one away, but obviously I've just tapped that keyway in. I actually just used a rusty old nasty hammer, and I just set the keyway in there with my fingers, and I went tap, tap, just very gently. But you know, even tapping it with a brass punch or something from, you know, up to your angle, just to kind of seat it in there. And then obviously we can set on this piece. And what I would do is just grab a socket or something and go ahead and tap it on with a socket once you get it lined up with the keyway. Okay, so what I did is I grabbed a socket. You can get one smaller in diameter than this, and I put that socket on here, and then I just tapped it with a metal hammer, obviously, until you hear it seat, right? And you'll hear the tone change, right? It'll be quite loud. Now, personally, obviously, I'm actually going to go grab the socket for this because it's going to make it easier. It might have happened to be the one I grabbed. No, it wasn't. But I just used an impact driver on this, but you should torque it to a correct torque anyway. Good luck finding the bit in the buzzer manual because it ain't there. But you could look up this thread size, right, and see what the maximum torque is supposed to be. So that's an option too, but it's going to be hard to hold that. It's actually easier on the buzzer because it's got pretty big flats. But anyway, so I'm going to use a 3/8 drive impact driver with a 17mm socket. That's just what I'm going to do. I'll tell you what, it makes it a hell of a lot easier undoing things that like to spin. So for this, for example, right, it just breaks it right free. Or when you tried to undo that sprocket, I actually held that with vice grips to tighten it. I held the rotted out bent tooth sprocket, right, with vice grips, but it makes it easy to undo things that spin. So now I'm going to hit this with the impact gun a little tiny. And when you're undoing things, right, is to mark it with dots, like punch a little dot there and there, so you knew how far to tighten it. Now, the piece to put on was this plate right here, and then there is the snap ring, as you probably know. So now we're ready to put this gasket on and the cover on. I wouldn't bother putting, and you didn't have to put high temp RTV on this case either, right? You could have just used no RTV because those don't actually tend to leak. I've had those apart a million times and back together, and then you could reuse them. So you don't have to do that, but I'll definitely be using high temp RTV on this, or even maybe a copper gasket, copper stuff I have that doesn't ever harden up, but maybe I'll just use that on the exhaust manifold. We'll see when we get there. Anyway, so now I'll just go ahead and put this cover on. I also have some stainless screws on this one. Okay, as we can see, the cover is on, and eventually we'll get to the electrics and the sprocket, Kickstarter spring, and the head, which is going to be the big one. But yeah, I rest my case. Obviously I can't film it and do it simultaneously, but as you know, this Kickstarter is probably a bear for you. This is just how I've done it, is I get a pair of vice grips on the spring, because it's just raw metal anyway, rotate the vice grips down, that way I can get the Kickstarter where I want it. This Kickstarter is actually off like a Bobo or some other bike. They have some funny names. Bobo, I don't even know what Bobo means. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. But this one's stepped out. Typically they're not like that. I'm not going to bother showing you the example because if you got a buzzer, you know. Or a Hornet, because this engine's pretty similar, if not the same. But yeah, so I rotate the vice grips down and I shove the peg on, and yeah. Anyway, maybe there's an easier way, but this is what I do, right? I got this big DeWalt clamp, and I've got the vice grips, and it pulls it around to help it, and now you can see we're getting it on, almost. But one thing you want to do is you want to clean out this little hole here and make sure that it's clean. So yeah, basically, you can see we went ahead and got it on here, and I put a stainless fastener in there as well. And I used 2 nuts, and you tighten the first nut onto there nice and tight because you want it to clamp on the spine and not strip out. Then you run a second nut on there. And you can use 2 wrenches. It's basically a lock nut and it will never come off. So you hold the wrench on the first nut, and then you get a wrench in the second nut, and then you tighten the bottom nut even tighter while holding the first one. And then it locks those 2 nuts together, and it'll never loosen up because every one of these buzzers I got, and the Hornet, the shaft is stripped. I think the Hornet shaft is actually okay because they didn't ride it long enough to mess it up, right? But that's the gist of it. Anyway, I think that's all.